Hello, I'm your host, James Dorsey. Please subscribe to my newsletter and or YouTube channel where you can click the notification button for more updates. Also, allow me to thank all who have demonstrated their appreciation for my column by becoming paid subscribers. This enables me to ensure that it continues to have maximum impact. Maintaining free distribution means that news websites, blogs, and newsletters across the globe can republish it. If you are able and willing to support the column, please become a paid subscriber by clicking on Substack on the subscription button at www.jamesmdorsey.substack.com and choosing one of the subscription options. Or support us on Patreon at patreon.com/MIDI Soccer. Thank you, take care, and best wishes. Hindu-Muslim relations are in a rout. Fear and prejudice have been weaponized. Hindu nationalists fuel intercommunal strife by emphasizing an imaginary demographic threat. Muslims believe themselves to be in a situation similar to that of Jews in Germany in the 1930s that led to genocide. India's far-right Hindu nationalist movement, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sanghi, or RSS, the ideological cradle of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his cohorts, speaks of a thousand-year war, while professing an interest in dialogue. The RSS is widely viewed as the catalyst of anti-Muslim violence and discrimination in India. The movement speaks to individual Indian Muslim leaders, but those conversations are mostly private, and the Indian Muslim community has been unable to develop a leadership that can channel a dialogue that could produce results. Stepping into the breach is Indonesia's Nahdlatul Ulama, arguably the world's most moderate Muslim civil society movement in the world's largest Muslim majority country and democracy. For Nahdlatul Ulama, engagement with the RSS is part of a bold and risky strategy to persuade faith groups, including Muslims, to confront their troubled, often violent histories and problematic tenets of their religions that reject pluralism and advocate supremacy. For the RSS, engagement is about redressing historical grievances dating to centuries of Muslim invasions and rule, defending Hindus against perceived contemporary Muslim threats, and ensuring that India is a Hindu rather than a non-discriminatory multi-religious state. That's a wide gap to bridge. To discuss all of this, I'm joined by A. Faizur Rahman, a prominent Indian Muslim thinker and Secretary General of the Islamic Forum for the Promotion of Moderate Thought. Most recently, Faizur authored a chapter on Islamophobia in India in a just published edited volume, The Politics of Hate, that focuses on South Asia. The well-written, insightful chapter is a must-read. Also, for further background on all of this, please read my latest column at www.jamesmdorsey.net. Faizur, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, James, for that lovely introduction. And thank you also for having me on your show. It's a privilege to be here and to speak with you.
The pleasure and the honor is mine, Faizur. Let's start with what is going on in India. We've seen in parts of India for the past 2 decades, and India as a whole since Prime Minister Narendra Modi first came to office in 2014, a spike in anti-Muslim violence and discrimination. At the same time, Hindu nationalists appear to be sending mixed messages. A BBC documentary denounced by the Indian government laid the blame for riots in 2002 in Gujarat, in which more than 1,000 people, mostly Muslims, were killed squarely at the feet of Mr. Modi, who was then the state's elected leader. This weekend, Mr. Modi, in a rare conciliatory gesture, urged leaders of his ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP, to engage in dialogue with Muslims. At the same time, RSS leader Mohan Bhagwat spoke of a 1,000-year war and expressed regret for aggression against Muslims, adding that it was unavoidable. What's going on, and do you see an opening for a dialogue, Fazur?
Yes. The opening for any dialogue or a dialogue is always there in any situation or any circumstances. Because it's only when our positions harden and only when we become too rigid and flexible that we refuse a dialogue. But dialogue must be must happen, and it should be initiated. And I really appreciate it in the sense that the RSS chief, Mr. Mohan Bhagwat, has been meeting some Muslim intellectuals and also has been sending out some reconciliatory messages in the media to the Muslim community that, after all, I mean, we have no problem with Islam. Uh, I really appreciate these initiatives from Mr. Bhagwat and the RSS. But the whole problem, in my opinion, with this approach of the RSS has been it's melding Indianness with Hindu-ness. In an interview about a year and a half ago, he said that he has no problem Muslims living in India. Well, that itself is a problematic statement, provided he said that they accept India as their motherland, Muslims, number one. Number two, accept the traditions or the parampara and Sanskriti, its culture. And three, that they should consider the respect the ancestors, the Saman Purvaja, you said, the common ancestors of the Hindus and Muslims. Of course, on the face of it, Muslims have never had any problem with this. Muslims have always accepted India as their motherland. We have no problem. I'm an Indian Muslim. I'm very proud to be an Indian. And in fact, I thank God that my ancestors chose India over Pakistan after the partition. I couldn't have imagined a person like me staying in Pakistan and articulating my views freely. I can do it in India. So therefore, I'm proud to be an Indian, and I'm lucky to be an Indian, lucky to be in India without any doubt. So we have accepted India as our motherland. We have absolutely no problem with our ancestors. And yet, Mr. Bhagwat makes this a condition, as if Muslims have not been doing it. That is not true. So what, in my opinion, that needs to be done is perhaps Mr. Bhagwat and his organization and other such organizations must be convinced by Muslim scholars, Muslim leaders, religious and secular leaders, that the reality is Indian Muslims are Indians in the totality first. We are Indians first and then perhaps Muslims later. Perhaps if this convincing message gets across to the other side, I mean, that could set the tone for a very meaningful dialogue with Hindu organizations. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Is that something that Nahdlatul Ulama, as a non-Indian organization, but a major Muslim organization, can contribute to, can facilitate? Nahdlatul Ulama has had a dialogue with the RSS now for the last 2 years. What is it that Nahdlatul Ulama sees, do you think? And have you seen any results from that dialogue or an impact of that dialogue?
Yeah. No, of course, any dialogue from India or outside, that actually brings about harmony between communities is always welcome, whether it is by Nahdlatul Ulama or any other organizations. In this context, the NU, that is Nahdlatul Ulama, has been attempting to reach out to the RSS, and as you said, that they have been in touch with the RSS and in dialogue with it for the past 2 years. But unfortunately, the Indian Muslims, it has never been reported in the press, so they are not aware of this dialogue. They're not aware. And even if they had been aware, this is a dialogue which is happening between two organizations which are in two different countries. Indonesia, of course, the largest Muslim population is in Indonesia, and India is number 2 in terms of Muslim population. But unfortunately, the Indian Muslims do not know, by and large, that such a dialogue is happening. And even such a dialogue, I mean, even the fact that the dialogue is going on, I do not know how much effect would it have on the Hindu-Muslim relations in India, because the dialogue has to be in the context of what's happening here. There's a lot of mistrust between communities. Unfortunately, there's very little being done to dispel, to remove this mistrust. So while I welcome the NU's dialogue with the RSS, what needs to be done here is such a dialogue must happen here, and and I I would suggest that it is the larger group at the moment, the Hindu groups led by because the RSS is the largest organization and the most influential organization, Hindu organization in India. So I think, and Mr. Bhagwat has been making some good statements of late. So I think it's up to the largest organization, Hindu organization in India, to come forward, extend its brotherly hand, because Mr. Bhagwat has always been calling Muslims "Hamare bhai hain." So, like, they are our brothers. Of course, we reciprocate that honestly and sincerely. So it is this kind of organization which must come and put a brotherly arm around our shoulders and talk to us and stop suspecting us. Muslims are not disloyal to India. Can never be. The very fact that they chose India or Pakistan is evidence to this. So I feel that such a dialogue must happen within India between the large organizations such as RSS and other Hindu organizations and Muslim organizations. When I say Muslim organizations, I don't necessarily mean the religious organizations, because the religious organizations have been another problem. Perhaps we could discuss this later in the interview. But they should have a dialogue with the largest section of the community, which is moderate, which is liberal, and which does not believe in any kind of exclusivism. So it is with this kind of people that the Hindu organization must have a dialogue, and this must be a publicized public dialogue, not private, as you said. Yeah.
It sounds to me like you're advocating two different things, even though they run parallel. One is a broader dialogue within India itself among Indians, and two is a broader dialogue or reaching out by Nahdlatul Ulama to various Indian organizations, including Indian Muslims, intellectuals, organizations. Would that be a correct interpretation?
Yes, of course. I mean, there's nothing wrong in sustaining and continuing the dialogue with NU in Indonesia. Certainly not. In fact, that should happen. And I think India was one of the prominent participants in the R20 recently at Bali. So I think that should go on. But then what's happening here in India is almost next to nothing. There was a meeting between some Muslim intellectuals, a few of them, with Mr. Bhagwat. They went on record saying it in interviews to the media and writing articles about it. But the RSS itself has not so far acknowledged it. I wonder why. If such a dialogue is happening, there's nothing secret about it. After all, these two communities are Indians, basically. We are Indian communities. We are brothers, as Mr. Bhagwat says, and why should such a dialogue be closed doors, within closed doors? It should be an open dialogue, it should be publicized, and most importantly, it should be unconditional. It should be in a position to give and take, because only a win-win situation in the end is beneficial to both sides, not just a win-lose for any one of them.
You touched on a subject which is, I think, very important, and that is, who should the interlocutors be? Nahdlatul Ulama is obviously an organization that is led by Islamic scholars and clerics, and it feels that the dialogue in India should be between religious figures, not only religious figures, but also religious figures. The question is whether that RSS wants to engage with religious figures or only with intellectuals and more secular people?
No, at the moment, the RSS has been engaging with both kinds of people. On the one hand, it has been publicly meeting religious scholars. The RSS chief had recently met with a few Muslim clerics. At the same time, but that was acknowledged, that was in the media. Whereas the meeting with Muslim intellectuals, I think 5 of them, if I'm not wrong, uh, was not publicized. It was held in private. And that was disclosed only by one side, the Muslim side. The RSS has so far not acknowledged this meeting. So, and this is what I think needs to change. This dialogue must happen in open and with different stakeholders. See, the the clerics, the ulama alone are not um, the representatives of Muslims. Muslims are represented by a host of people. They have political interests, they have economic interests, they have social interests, same time religious interests. So I think the dialogue must happen with various stakeholders, not just any one set of people.
If I look at the dialogue between Nahdlatul Ulama and the RSS over the last 2 years, my sense is that that dialogue has offered the RSS far more than it's offered Nahdlatul Ulama, in the sense of legitimization by one of the world's foremost Muslim civil society organizations, but also given the concept of Nahdlatul Ulama of a humanitarian Islam, an Islam that is pluralistic and in recognition of universal human rights, that the RSS has been able to use that sort of as a platform or as an ability to tell Indian Muslims, this is what your Islam should be. Would you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely. I have no issue with anyone telling Muslims what Islam is, as long as that is the Islam. That is the Islam which is there in the Quran. Because as far as I am concerned, the 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 original source of Islam is the Quran. So any Islam that comes outside the Quran and conflicts with the Quran cannot be the original Islam as taught and preached by our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So therefore, if the RSS points out to Muslims, hey, this is what your Prophet taught and preached, and why don't you adopt that? I have no problem with anybody saying that to me. Certainly not. But at the same time, uh, they should also allow the Muslims to say this to other Hindu organizations, including the RSS, that the kind of Hindutva that you are propagating, which to all of us sounds very exclusive, is also not what Hinduism, or what is also known as originally the Sanatan Dharma, the ancient Dharma, the ancient way of life, stood for and preached. So that was very accommodative. That did not lay down any conditions. For instance, the Sanatan Dharma is actually more of a philosophy, and it is an umbrella term which encompasses and accommodates within itself various philosophies, both religious, both theistic, and sometimes even atheistic, materialistic. For instance, the Charvaka philosophy is almost atheistic. Even that is accommodated within Hinduism. It's a very broad term and it's very accommodative and no conditions imposed. So I think the exclusive kind of Hindutva that RSS and other Hindu organizations propagate or promote, in my opinion, and also in the opinion of many scholars among Hindus, many Hindu scholars and also Muslim scholars, feel that that is not what original Sanatan Dharma or the Hindu philosophy stands for. Perhaps the RSS could reconsider its position and move a little away from the Sarwarkarian position of Hindutva, where only Hindus are considered, where the Indianness is talked or spoken of only in terms of Hindu-ness. I mean, you're trying to synonymize in a sense, both Hindu and Indian. I think that is a little problematic. Perhaps the RSS must reconsider its position there. If that happens, if this is an exchange, and if both sides understand this, that yes, the Muslims cannot say you are a non-Muslim body, you have no right to preach Islam to us. That would not be correct. After all, Islam is for humanity. Anybody has a right to read the Quran and understand it and even propagate it. We cannot monopolize the Quran. We cannot monopolize Islam. After all, Islam itself says it is for humanity. In a similar way, Sanatan Dharma, the Hindu tradition, the Hindu philosophy is also universal. It can't be monopolized by any one group or a community. I mean, it belongs to all Indians in a sense. We are all Indians. That is what needs to be recognized. So if this exchange of thought is there, where both sides are told, see, these are the universal values common to both these systems, Hinduism and Islam, Sanatan Dharma and Islam. I think let us, I mean, join together and work together to promote these values. As brothers and sisters. I think that would be a great thing to do rather than any one person saying that, what I follow is the only right path. This kind of exclusivism or, where we say that only we are right and others are wrong, I think should be avoided by all communities. I would go for such a dialogue, and such a dialogue must always be to emphasize again unconditional.
This segues very nicely into my next question, which is
Yeah.
Nahdlatul Ulama hopes that its willingness to confront head-on intolerant and supremacist tenets of Islamic law will convince the RSS to develop a Hindu equivalent of humanitarian Islam that calls for pluralism and universal human rights, and take a critical look at Hindu theology, history, and anti-Muslim attitudes. Is that something that you think is realistic?
Yes, of course, certainly. The only thing is that, I have never considered Hinduism to be exclusive. I have always considered Hinduism to be a very moderate and a peaceful philosophy or a tradition or a way of life, dharma. It stands for peace. It stands for harmony between communities. It's accommodative. It is inclusive. This famous term, Vasudhaiva Kudupakam, which means which actually equates humanity with one family. And it again, these terms are there in the Upanishads, the Hindu texts such as the Upanishads and also the Vedas, the Rig Veda and many other Vedas. These terms are there. There's another term, in Hindu philosophy, which goes like this: Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, which means the truth is one. Sages call it by different names. This is exactly what the Quran says. So there's absolutely no difference. Even the Quran says, I mean, Islam is one religion. Islam is not. In fact, I would want the Muslims to, on the lines of what NU is doing, to kind of de-religionize their faiths. Islam basically was never a religion. It was a social movement, basically. It was a reform movement. It came to liberate humanity from the oppressive yokes. It was made into a religion much later, after the Prophet. The Prophet was basically a reformer like any other person. Of course, he spoke of worshipping of one God, which is called Tawheed. And he never discriminated against communities. He took along everybody. So, and it was needed. People were oppressed in the name of different gods. So he had to talk about the one unique universal God. In the circumstances, that was the right thing to do. But then he was not preaching a religion exclusively. He was basically reforming society and at the same time liberating them from the oppressive yokes. In the context of the Prophet himself, it was the Meccan oligarchs who had actually imposed such a enslaved basically the people of Mecca. He was liberating them. So in this sense, Islam is a liberative movement. It's an emancipatory movement. So therefore, if you try to confine Islam to just to a ritualistic form of religion, that would actually negate what the Prophet stood for, what the Quran preaches and advocates. So if the NU seems to be doing this, certainly. For instance, I welcome the NU's idea that the word kafir cannot refer to non-Muslims. It cannot. The idea of kafir in the Quran is totally different from what we understand today. What we are made to understand today by the clergy is totally wrong. The word comes from the word kufr. Kufr is usually translated as infidelity or lack of faith. No, kufr has been used in the Quran in three broad meanings. I mean, I've written that in my article. It one stands for anybody who rejects faith, or anybody who suppresses, rejects truth, or suppresses truth, or is ungrateful. This has been used only in these three meanings in the Quran. So it is more of an attitude of a person towards truth and rationalism. It does not designate the faith or the lack of it of any person. So if this is understood, there won't be a major issue. And that this point was raised by Mr. Mohan Bhagwat in one of the discussions he had with Muslim intellectuals. He said that the Muslims must stop. I'm sorry, the Muslims must stop calling Hindus as kafirs, infidels. See, the request or demand was legitimate, certainly. But there was one problem. The Muslims were not calling Hindus kafirs at all. The one problem that Mr. Bhagwat has been exhibiting, throughout his discourse with or discussion with Muslim is that, whenever he refers to something Islamic, he tries to equate them with the entire Muslim community. And that is not true. The Muslim community, neither in India or any other place, is not monolithic, and nor are they in agreement entirely with what the clerics say. It is some fatwas, it is some texts which are post-Quranic, the post-prophetic texts. This word kufr or kafir has never been used in the Quran or any of the prophetic hadiths to refer to non-Muslims at all. No, this comes much later. All the texts that refer to such points to such linkages between non-Muslims and lack of faith are texts of fatwas, basically, which came centuries after the Prophet's passing away. So therefore, it is a clerical problem. It is not a communal problem. The Muslim community in India, I have been here for a long time. I have never seen any Muslim, my friend, or anyone else I know, calling a Hindu as a kafir. No, we always call them as Hindus or Sikhs or Christians. No, we never call them kafir. I am part of a community. I have never seen anybody calling a Hindu a kafir. So it is not Muslims who are doing that. There are some fatwas which make such a point. We have to question those fatwas, and we'll have to disregard those fatwas. And this is where I feel that the Muslim clerics, the Muslim ulama must come forward and say that yes, these fatwas are there. They were said long back. They're not relevant any longer. They must come and say that openly. Issue another fatwa, perhaps saying that non-Muslims are not kafirs. That will set the tone. That will remove a lot of mistrust between Muslims and Hindus here. But unfortunately, I've never seen any Muslim organization coming out and clarifying that non-Muslims are not kafirs. They have to clarify this. They have to make a categorical statement to that effect. And unfortunately, as far as I know, to the best of my knowledge, no prominent Muslim religious organization has come forward and clarified this. So that is a problem which the Muslim community must overcome. And here I feel that the Muslim laity has also a role to play against the clergy. They must pressurize, they must come forward and influence the clergy to come out of that medieval mindset and then, live in modern times, contextualize Islam. The laity also has a responsibility in that sense. So that this will improve Hindu-Muslim relations to a large extent, in my opinion.
I want to come back to the issues of kafir as well as the much broader issue of religious reform in a second. Let me just stick for a moment yet with the RSS,
Sure,
which is
sure.
an almost 100-year-old organization, 5 million members strong, and the voice of militant Hindu nationalism. Its influence has been obviously magnified with its disciples in national government for the past 8 years. Is there any alternative to a dialogue with the RSS? And if not, why have Indian Muslim leaders been unable to engage in the way that Nahdlatul Ulama has?
See, there is no alternative to a dialogue. See, Islam does not believe in violence. The very name Islam means peace. So a Muslim is one who stands for peace, who upholds peace, who promotes peace. So therefore, in my opinion, there is absolutely no room for an alternative to a dialogue. The Quran is very clear about it, and and even this dialogue, the Quran says, needs to be done in a very beautiful way. You know, even if it's a debate, the verse in the Quran which talks about it is وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. The verse begins this way: "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal mau'izatil hasana wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan." So you invite people towards the way of God with wisdom. I mean, not being aggressive. You need to use wisdom. You need to be very polite. And then wal mau'izatil hasana. I mean, you have to talk in such a language which actually softens people. The word was in Arabic means that which softens. A speech or a talk that softens people, not aggravates the situation. So, and then even if it has to be a jidal or a debate, because it's, in a dialogue there can be a debate sometimes, the people may disagree. So even that the Quran says, "Wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan," it has to be in the best possible way, in a civil way. So this is laid down in the Quran itself. And there's no alternative to this. I mean, there is absolutely no violence. Quran does not promote violence. All those verses in the violence were in response to the attacks against Islam and the Muslims, and they were only in self-defense, with the Quran categorically stating that once they stop attacking you, you have no right to even self-defense. So therefore, in my opinion, there is no alternative to a dialogue. And if Indian Muslims, the leadership is not in a position to have a dialogue with the RSS or the Hindu organization, there are several reasons for this. One, there's hardly any Muslim organization which is, I'm talking about Muslim religious organizations, an organization which is liberal or moderate enough. At the back of the mind, all these organizations think that, Muslims some way are superior. They have this supremacist understanding of Islam. I mean, they also believe in what can be called salvific exclusivism. They believe that salvation can only be for Muslims. This is a problem with almost many Semitic religions, or interpretations of Semitic religions. Even the Christians feel that salvation is only for Christians, and maybe others too feel so. But from Islamic point of view, salvific exclusivity is alien to the Quran, is alien to the Prophet's teachings. It's not part of those teachings at all. The Quran, in very two powerful verses in Surah Baqarah and Surah Ma'idah, very clearly says that anyone who stands for peace, anyone who actually recognizes the universal law of the Creator, I mean, is fit to be saved. So the Quran does not speak of any kind of exclusivism. So, but Muslim organizations at the back of the mind always feel that, most of them feel that. I'm talking about religious organizations, that Muslims are a better community, or we have the truth, others don't. So this attitude must go, and this hinders a dialogue. Because I have many Muslim religious scholars have told me, who have studied in madrasas, have told me that even non-Muslims have no right to interpret the Quran. The Quran can be interpreted, Islam can be interpreted or represented only by Muslims. This is another problem. The Quran makes no such distinction, and neither did the Prophet. So where did we get this idea from? All these things came much later during the caliphates, several caliphates, where this ulama state nexus was there. I mean, they enjoyed a symbiotic relationship, the ulama and the rulers. Therefore, these people created all these things to let the rulers rule forever, in a sense, and the rulers never interfered with the fatwas and decisions of the clergy. So this system worked for a long time, and this is where all these problems, the exclusivism or the hatred against non-Muslims or salvific exclusivism came about. So if Muslim religious organizations are willing to do away with this and make Islam and restore the original inclusivism of Islam, that would be a great step forward. And the other thing that may be hindering is the RSS itself, as I said, sometimes speaks the language of exclusivism. For instance, I let me quote in a recent interview, Mr. Bhagwat, I have it with me here. He says that हमारे भारत में जो मुसलमान हैं वो रहना चाहते हैं, वो रहना चाहते हैं, रहें, पूर्वजों के पास वापस आना चाहते हैं, आए. It says that हमारे भारत में, in our country, in our India, the Muslims who are here, if they want to stay here, let them stay. We have no problem. वो रहना चाहते हैं, रहें. पूर्वजों के पास वापस आना. If they want to come back to the ancestral way of life, what is known as ghar wapsi, kind of, to go back to the Hindu roots, they are free to come. So here the exclusivity here is that Mr. Bhagwat and his organization seems to have at the back of the mind that India is basically a Hindu nation, and we are only accommodating the Muslims. And I think this is a fallacy, and then perhaps the RSS needs to address that. So this hinders an open dialogue with the Muslim community also, or even with the Muslim clergy. So in fact, what I'm saying is there's a clash of exclusivisms here at the moment. So this clash of exclusivisms must give way to an inclusive dialogue. And the other part that Mr. Bhagwat said was, he said that yes, they can be here or come back to our ancestral way of life, lekin they must give up certain things, the Muslims. And what is the certain things that they are willing to? They must give up. They must stop saying, एक समय हम राजा थे, हम फिर राजा बनेंगे. ये छोड़ना पड़ेगा. Mr. Bhagwat says. This was quoted by the organizer, the RSS publication. He says that the Muslims, if they start saying that once we ruled India and we would like to rule India again, they have to stop saying this. Of course, nothing wrong in such a statement. I would entirely agree with Mr. Bhagwat there, of course. But the problem is Muslims are not saying it. Mr. Bhagwat himself does not quote or did not quote a single instance of the Muslim community as a whole saying it, or even a small group among Muslims saying that we ruled India and we want to rule again. No Muslim says that. Even Muslim religious organizations have not made any such statement. So there is no evidence to the fact that Muslims hold such views in India. No. So then why does Mr. Bhagwat say that Muslims must stop doing this when they're not even doing it? So I feel that this lack of trust, I think this all boils down to lack of trust. Perhaps Mr. Bhagwat has been not, it's not fully, and has not been fully updated with what's going on. And perhaps he must visit a lot of Muslim communities. He must come and visit Muslim people, Muslim societies. He must visit different mosques to meet them. This outreach he can do to know what's in their mind. This will be a good step forward. But instead, if he just makes statements, and the other part is all these statements are only made to RSS publications or at RSS or Hindu functions. I think Mr. Bhagwat must also speak to the other media organizations. They must also come out and talk to Muslims, Muslim organizations, Muslim people. Basically, there should be a people-to-people contact, because Believe me when I tell you this, James, at the people to people level in India, there's hardly any problem between Muslims and Hindus. I live in Chennai. I have no such issue. I've gone to Delhi, I've gone to Nagpur, I've gone to many other places. I don't see any problem between Hindus and Muslims. There's no problem at all. So, if the Hindu organizations too reach out to Muslim society in general at the grassroots level, they will find that the Muslims in India love the country. The Muslims in India are totally as loyal as any citizen can be. We have no problem. We are lucky to be here. We say we are very happy to be here. No doubt about that. At the same time, the Muslim religious leaders must also stop believing that all the Hindus are like some organizations. For instance, there was this recent Dharam Sansad in Haridwar, wherein calls for a Muslim genocide were issued. Of course, the case is going on. A case has been filed against such people. The entire Hindu community is not represented by these people. The Hindu community in India is a very moderate, peace-loving community. The Muslim clerics must also realize this and go out and reach out to Hindu communities and talk to them. And this is what will, in my opinion, will bring both communities together. If we just let organizations talk between themselves or talk privately, nothing is going to change much. So I would suggest that there should be a movement at the grassroots level to bring the two communities together and establish, talk of in a peaceful way, in an unconditional way, and in a way that actually promotes brotherhood and sisterhood in the sense. So I think if both communities, because from the Hindu point of view, I consider the RSS to be the most influential organization in India at the moment. So if it comes from that side, they are our elder brothers. Bhagavad is like our elder brother. So therefore, if he initiates a grassroots connection, a contact between the Muslims, I think a lot can happen. Muslims will certainly come forward and we will extend the hand of friendship. It's not that they are enemies at the moment. No, at the moment we have no issue with any Hindu people, Hindu community or any Hindu group. Certainly not. It is the other side we seem to have some issue with us at the moment, and all these things are based on what you call misinformation. For instance, demography. Muslims are trying to outnumber the Hindus. No, it's not possible. They're not even doing it. All these fertility rates are falling, which I've written in my chapter in the book that you quoted. I have given reasons that Muslims are not doing any kind of jihad, whether it is Corona jihad or love jihad. There's no evidence again. Courts have said that. So this is based on the perceptions which are not based on facts. So if these misconceptions are clarified, and if they are overcome, I think that nothing can prevent Indian Muslims and Hindus from coming together and working towards the progress of our country and making it the Vishwaguru that the Prime Minister has been talking about. It is very much possible. Not that the people to people level there is any problem at the moment. No, there is no problem between Hindus and Muslims at the moment at all at the people to people level. It is only in some pockets due to some vested interest creating these issues. Otherwise, there's no issue. So now what has happened is because of these vested interest groups, a lot of moderate Muslims and moderate Hindus are afraid to come out and speak up for harmony. So if this initiative is taken by the RSS and reciprocated wholeheartedly by the Muslim leadership and even the community, I think that would pave the way for a wonderful Hindu-Muslim unity in this country.
I want to focus for a minute on one thing that you said, which is sort of the definition that the RSS uses. I've heard some Muslim figures say that, in fact, the RSS definition of who is a Muslim or even who is a Hindu is an inclusive one, and they basically argue that the RSS defines a Hindu as in cultural terms, and refers to that as including anybody who lives in India, and doesn't refer to Hindu as such as a religious group. Would you agree that that is the RSS's definition in your understanding? And would that be a healthy basis for dialogue?
See, I mean, this, as I said, the melding of Indianness with Hindu-ness has always been a problematic thing, because the term Hindu has never been associated with Indianness in the past. No historian has ever associated with Indianness itself. The Hindu historically has been used for the religion of people beyond the river Indus, this side. So it has been, of course, it may include the culture too, but at the same time, there existed parallel communities in India which were not Hindu in their outlook. Because in India, even within the Hindu community, for instance, the cultures vary. If Mr. Bhagwat is talking about cultural nationalism or cultural Hinduism, which makes all Indians culturally one, again, that is not only historically but factually not possible, because factually speaking, the culture in India differs from state to state. The culture in Bengal, of course, an excellent culture, but it differs from the culture of Tamil Nadu. It will differ from the culture of Maharashtra. It will differ from the culture of Kashmir, certainly. So all these are all Indian states. These are all Indian regions, and there are Hindus and Muslims. For instance, a Muslim in Tamil Nadu will be culturally close to the Tamils here. For instance, the festival of Pongal, if you see, the festival of Pongal is celebrated both by Muslims and Hindus, although it's not a Muslim festival. But culturally, a lot of Muslims here are Tamils, and therefore they have no problem in celebrating a festival called Pongal. Similarly, Muslim may be doing that in Bengal. They will be culturally closer to even Bengali Hindus, but they may not be culturally closer to, say, Maharashtra Hindus. That doesn't make them anti-Hindu. Similarly, if Muslims don't celebrate Diwali or Deepavali here, it doesn't mean that they are opposed to any Hindu festival. No, it is that they have been enculturized in a certain environment, and that process of enculturation has happened historically over long periods of time. So therefore, my argument is there is not one culture in India that can be termed as Hindu or Muslim or Bengali or Tamil or any other. All these cultures are there in those regions, certainly, and all are Indian cultures. Anybody following that culture is as an Indian, is much an Indian as a person in Maharashtra following the Hindu culture there. The Hindu culture there differs from the Bengali Hindu culture. Doesn't mean that they are opposed to each other. Culture is geographical. Culture is traditional in many sense. I mean, there are various. The history. It's basic heredity. There are a variety of histories to that. So I feel that if Mr. Bohan Bhagat or the RSS wants to kind of talk about just one culture, that does not exist. India is a place of various cultures. A variety of cultures coexist peacefully. Have been coexisting peacefully. So now, if you try to limit it to one and impose it on others and make it conditional to establish a person's Indianness, I think that would not be very good in terms of what you call bringing about communal harmony. I think we need to believe in the age-old doctrine of India called unity in diversity. We have been united despite our diverse religions, cultures, and habits and traditions. We have been living as Indians. Ever since independence, there had never been a problem. So why should it happen now? Therefore, I feel the Mr. Bhagwat and the RSS must be a little more accommodative of other cultures and not to define them in terms of any one culture. I think, therefore, I feel that that may not be the right way to move forward at the moment.
We've touched quite a bit during this conversation on the issue of religious reform. But I'd like to go a little bit deeper in that. You've said in this conversation, but also in your chapter, you've argued that Muslims need to clarify their beliefs by stressing that India is not part of the Muslim notion of Dar al-Harb, or the abode of war.
Yeah.
and like Nahdlatul Ulama, declare that the concept of a kafir or infidel does not apply to non-Muslims. You've
Absolutely.
also explicitly called in the chapter for theological reform. My question is, are we talking about jurisprudential reform here in the way that Nahdlatul Ulama does? And if so, wouldn't that not only apply not to concepts of the kafir or and Dar al-Harb, but also to issues such as the dhimmis, the people of the book in Islamic law, or, for example, issues such as apostasy and blasphemy?
Yes. Yes, certainly. See, it has to be two-pronged. The approach has to be two-pronged. The jurisprudential reform uh, 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 or reform itself can be jurisprudential as well as social. Jurisprudential in the sense that, for instance, in India, we had a recently problem of triple talaq or instant talaq, where a husband has a right, a Muslim husband has a right to simply divorce his wife and throw her out of the house just by pronouncing the word talaq thrice in quick succession. In 3 seconds flat, the wife is rendered a stranger and thrown out of the house. This is totally un-Islamic. There's nothing to support this jurisprudential practice, but it had been happening for ages in India. So, but finally, the Supreme Court stepped in and invalidated it, and that was an excellent judgment. I welcome, and we all welcome. Muslim welcome the judgment. So, that such had the Muslims themselves done this, there would have been no need for the Supreme Court to intervene. The Supreme Court intervened correctly, and it was excellent judgment. Triple talaq has no place in Islam. The same way, there are many other jurisprudential issues which affect the community within, that such reforms must happen. And there are other reforms legally also which should be done, which affect other communities. You mentioned blasphemy and apostasy. Apostasy affects the people within Islam. Of course, anybody who rejects Islam is termed an apostate, and he is liable to be killed, according to many Islamic schools of thought. Here again, this is not based on the Quran or any authentic prophetic hadith. These are all based on fatwas, on texts that came centuries after the Prophet had passed away, peace be upon him. And these have to go. Blasphemy again affects the non-Muslims. Basically, if somebody accuses or even criticizes any Islamic figure, that's construed as blasphemy. And in Pakistan, recently they have expanded the blasphemy law. They have strengthened it further, I believe, and they have severely said that it's not just any blasphemy against the Prophet, but against his companions and his wives and other relatives will also be construed as blasphemy, and can be you can be jailed for 10 years with heavy fine of 1 million rupees or something. I mean, once again, there should be reform here, mainly because any law that you formulate in Islam, in the name of Islam, in the name of Sharia, must satisfy two basic conditions. The first condition is it should be based on the Quran. It should not violate the Quran, or it should not violate, number two, any prophetic statement. But most of these laws, as you see, on blasphemy and apostasy, completely violate the Quran and prophetic statements. On blasphemy, the Prophet has been very clearly said in the Quran that yes, these people have abused you, these people have called you names, these people have caused you harm. But the Quran says, have patience with them. And overlook and forgive them. In chapter 5, the words used are overlook and forgive them, afwa, forgive them. This is the instruction of the Prophet. And Prophet, and in chapter 73, in Surah Muzammil, the Prophet has been very categorically told, wasbir, I'm quoting the Quran here, wasbir ala ma yaqulun fahjurum hajran jamila. Have patience with whatever they say. Be patient with what they say. They're abusive statements. And disengage from them in a dignified way. Wahjurum hajran jamila. Jamil is beautiful. In a beautiful way, disengage from them without antagonizing them or abusing them back. And this is exactly how the Prophet behaved through his life. There's a statement of his Aisha, Hazrat Aisha, his wife, who says that the Prophet was a walking Quran. meaning he lived the Quran. Basically, he walked the Quran. It's not just he struck the Quran, he also walked the Quran according to Hazrat Aisha, his wife. So the Prophet did nothing. And in fact, he's made to categorically state in the Quran itself, I of my own self cannot change the Quran. I only follow what has been revealed to me. This is the Quranic statement. So now, when the Prophet himself has stated so clearly that he will not go against the Quran, and he has never gone against the Quran, all he has been doing is following what has been revealed to him in the Quran. Then how can we later on make laws that violate the Quran? Certainly, these laws, therefore, for this fundamental reason, cannot be uh, tenable under Islam. So, therefore, reform has to come there, without any doubt, because this affects non-Muslims. Anybody can in Pakistan. It is used, I'm told, to settle scores with non-Muslims. If somebody wants some property, I've read in the media, if somebody wants any property of somebody, all that you need to do is accuse him of blasphemy and blackmail him. These are all media reports from Pakistan. So I feel that certainly these reforms are needed within Islam, and that will also restore faith in others. I mean, faith of others in Muslims. They will start believing that yes, Islam is not religion. Which practices these things. Is basically religion where justice is ensured, peace is ensured. So if this is the perception that you need to build, the Muslim clergy must come forward and reform the laws jurisprudentially and socially, and all those laws that affect both Muslims and non-Muslims.
Indeed. Unfortunately, we're coming towards the end of this conversation. But before I let you go, I want to touch on one other issue of reform that you have highlighted in the chapter in the edited volume that I haven't heard most other Muslim reformers talk about, and that's the principle of dawah, of proselytization, which you described as a tool of Islamic supremacism. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah. See, the word dawa actually means invitation. I just quoted a verse before, a few minutes ago during this conversation, where the Quran, the verse starts this way: Udu'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah. Udu, this is where the dawa comes from. Udu dawa. Udu is invite. Dawa is invitation. So, Udu'u ila sabili, towards the path of God. Bil hikmah, with wisdom. But now, Muslims have given up this wisdom. And they also forgotten what the invitation means to the peace of the path of God. What does the path of God signify? Does the path of God signify does it signify religious rituals? Is the Quran talking about inviting people to grow a long beard, inviting people to wear a hijab, or inviting people to pray 5 times a day? Of course, these are all praying 5 times a day it is an obligatory practice, no doubt. Of course, these are Islamic practices. But is the Quran referring to these practices, or is it talking about the general way of life? Where justice, peace, and equity, harmony is ensured. The value system. This is what the Quran is referring to. You have to invite people to a common value system, and there's another verse which says that. It says, Ya Ahlul Kitab, ta'alu ila kalimatin sawa'in bainana wa bainakum. It tells to the people of book. The people of book, it could be anybody. It could also not just the Christians and Jews. It could be anybody with the book. Even the Hindus could be included in that term. So basically, it's telling to all people, let us come to common terms. Meaning, let us find what is common between us and follow that. This is the path of God. The path of God does not mean that you invite a person to something which is exclusively yours and tell him, if you don't do this, you're not part of this faith. You're outside it. That is not what the Quran is telling. That is the hikmah the Quran talking about. It has to be done in hikmah. Hikmah or wisdom demands that we invite people to something that is common. Because otherwise, why would another person come to a path which is exclusively mine and he has nothing there? There's nothing in it for him. So Islam is so inclusive that all it expects of you is to be a peace-loving person. That is what Islam signifies. Islam means peace. The Muslim is a person who follows Islam. In other words, the Muslim, the person who upholds peace. So this is what the Quran says, that Islam is the religion. And the term religion again is not part of Islam, not part of the Quran. What is translated as religion in various Quranic translations is the term deen. Deen can be synonymous with dharma of the Hindu faith, or dain of the Zoroastrian faith, where we talk about a way of life, a universal way of life. So this universal way of life, where the values are common. I mean, not cheating anybody, not fooling anybody. I mean, not being unjust and being just to people, spreading peace and harmony. These are values which are common to all systems, whether a Hindu, Christian, or Muslim. So this is what the Quran also reminds you and tells you that you have to invite them. There may be people who are violent. For instance, in the context of Makkah, the people were violent. People were calling them to an exclusive set of gods, wherein they were using those gods, they were exploiting people by taking a lot of money from them and bribes from them in the name of appeasing those gods to sort out other issues, social issues. The Prophet said, no, this is not, can't be true. There can't be so many gods. It was in this context that the Prophet talked about one universal God, the concept of Tawheed. So when we invite people to God, this is what we're inviting to. But today, the word dawa has been so misunderstood and so, they have made it so narrow that, for instance, a Salafi would invite a person only to the Salafi path of God, so-called Salafi understanding of Islam, wherein you can't even, for instance, there's this so-called televangelist named Zakir Naik. He says that Muslims should not wish Christians on Christmas. Muslims should not wish Hindus on Diwali. They should not wish other Hindus on Pongal. In short, Muslims should not wish any non-Muslim on their festivities, on their festivals, because once you do that, you become like them. You become appreciating those festivals. You should not be doing that because Islam is exclusive, and if you adopt that, you're going away from Islam. This is not Islamic. This is not what the Prophet taught. This is not what the Quran stands for. This is not dawa. If you're inviting people, to this path of life, so-called this path is not the path of God at all, from a Quranic or a prophetic point of view. So this is what I was criticizing. I was not criticizing the idea of dawa itself. The idea of dawa is Quranic. But what is that idea of Quranic dawa? It is not what the Zakir Naik kind of people are preaching. So my criticism is against that kind of a dawa, where you call people to an exclusive way of life, which is completely antithetical to what the Prophet and the Quran stood for. This is, and before I forget, let me also tell you, as I wrote in that article, there are some groups which believe that India is Darul Harb, the abode of war or land of war. No, certainly not. For me, India is Darul Aman. It is a land of peace. Muslims are able to live in peace. More Muslims are killed in Pakistan today, the Ahmadis and the Shias, through bomb blasts. Of course, yes, we have a problem in India. I mean, there are some organizations which are calling for the lynching of Muslims. And luckily, and it's a good thing that Mr. Bhagwat has also said that lynching is against Hindutva. He has made it categorically, but I think he should come out further and call for action against these people who are doing it, call for legal action. And these people must be booked and be tried under the law. And at the same time, the people who call for genocide, whether they are Muslims or Hindus, who were called for violence, must be booked under the law. So I think if this happens, these are all happening, no doubt. These are all have in the recent past increased, no doubt about that. But by and large, India happens to be a peaceful place. I cannot think of myself living in Pakistan and making all these comments and writing all those articles from Pakistan. Many Muslim scholars in Pakistan were forced to migrate from Pakistan to go to US or Canada or other countries to even voice their opinions. That is not the case for Muslims in India so far. I feel that in that sense, India is a Darul Aman, is a abode of peace. Yes, there are issues. There are issues, and this is where I feel that people like Mr. Mohan Bhagwat must come out, put the foot down, and say that anybody, even if happens, if happens, especially if he happens to be, or even if that such a person happens to be, a group happens to be from within the Hindu fold, we will not tolerate any violence or statements that promote violence. If this is done, I think everything is sorted out. But at the moment, yes, it is happening. I mean, the law is invoked against the people who have been lynching and making those statements. I mean, the courts are seized of the matter. The courts are going on. The cases are going on. No doubt about that. But there should be, if these such statements and activities are entirely stopped, and Muslims totally reciprocate and consider Hindus also their brothers, and I think I don't see any reason why Hindu-Muslim unity should come about sooner than later.
Faisal, on that note, unfortunately, time flies.
Yes,
we could easily talk for another hour or so.
Absolutely.
This has been extremely informative and extremely enlightening. Thank you very much for joining the show, The Turbulent World with James M. Dorsey. And we hope to have you back on the show very soon.
Inshallah, inshallah. Thank you so much for having me, James. And have a great day.
And thank all of you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Also, thank you to all who have demonstrated their appreciation for my column by becoming paid subscribers. This allows me to ensure that it continues to have maximum impact. Maintaining free distribution means that news websites, blogs, and newsletters across the globe can republish it. If you are able and willing to support the column, please become a paid subscriber by clicking on Substack on the subscription button at www.jamesmdorsey.substack.com and choosing one of the subscription options, or support us on Patreon at patreon.com/MideastSoccer. Please join me for my next podcast in the coming days. Thank you. Take care and best wishes.